The day I decided to quit was the day I finally ran out of reasons to keep pretending I was fine. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the envelope before I reached the executive floor. The resignation letter felt heavier than paper should. Maybe because it carried 3 years of exhaustion, 3 years of impossible expectations, 3 years of waking up before sunrise and falling asleep wondering why nothing I did ever felt like enough. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor of Moretti Capital. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan. The skyline glowed beneath a gray afternoon sky. Normally, I loved this view. Today it felt distant, like I was already leaving it behind. I tightened my grip on the envelope and walked toward the corner office. Every step felt harder than the last. People smiled as I passed. A few wished me a good afternoon. I smiled back automatically. Nobody noticed the tears gathering in my eyes. Nobody noticed that I was barely holding myself together. Then again, I had become very good at hiding it. I stopped outside Adrien Moretti's office and took a deep breath. One knock, then another. Come in. His voice carried through the door. Calm, controlled, the same way it always sounded. I opened the door and stepped inside. Adrien sat behind a massive walnut desk reviewing documents. Sunlight filtered through the windows behind him. For several seconds, he did not look up. Then he did. The moment his eyes found mine, everything changed. Adrien was the kind of man people noticed immediately. Not because he raised his voice, because he never needed to. Power seemed to follow him naturally. But right now, the only thing he seemed focused on was me. His expression shifted almost instantly. Madison. He stood. What happened? The concern in his voice nearly broke me. I had rehearsed this moment all morning. I was supposed to be professional, calm, prepared. Instead, tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. Embarrassment hit immediately. I looked away. I am sorry. Do not apologize. His answer came without hesitation. I swallowed hard and placed the envelope on his desk. I came to give you this. Adrien glanced down at the envelope, then back at me. He already knew what it was. I could see it in his eyes. Slowly, he picked it up and opened it. The room became painfully quiet. I stared at the city beyond the windows while he read. Seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, he placed the letter down. No. I blinked. What? Adrien folded the resignation letter and set it aside. No. I stared at him. You have not even asked why. Because this is not about work. His gaze never left mine. The certainty in his voice caught me off guard. You do not know that. I do. He walked around the desk. You have never missed a deadline. Never avoided responsibility. Never quit anything. My throat tightened. People change. Not overnight. The tears returned before I could stop them. Adrien looked at me for several seconds. Not judging. Not analyzing. Just seeing me. Really seeing me. Then he asked a question nobody else had asked. A question that hit harder than anything else that day. Who convinced you that you are not enough? For several seconds, I could not answer. The question hung in the air between us like something fragile and dangerous. Who convinced you that you are not enough? Nobody had ever asked me that before. People asked if I was stressed. People asked if I needed a vacation. People asked if work was overwhelming. Nobody had ever asked where the feeling came from. My eyes dropped to the floor. It does not matter. Adrien's expression remained calm. It matters if it brought you here. I laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. You make it sound simple. Sometimes it is. I shook my head immediately. No, it is not. The words came out sharper than I intended. Embarrassment followed instantly. Sorry. Adrien sighed quietly. There you go again. I frowned. What? Apologizing for existing. The statement hit harder than I expected. Silence filled the office. Outside the windows, Manhattan continued moving beneath gray skies. Traffic crawled through the streets. People hurried across sidewalks. The city never stopped. Yet inside that office, time seemed to slow. Adrien walked toward the conference table near the windows and motioned for me to sit. I have meetings. I glanced at the clock. 3 of them. They can wait. My eyes widened. What? Adrien picked up his phone. Without hesitation, he sent several messages. Then he set the phone down. There. They're what? Now they are tomorrow. I stared at him. You moved your meetings? Yes. Because of me? Adrien looked genuinely confused by the question. Madison. His voice softened slightly. You walked into my office crying. When he said it out loud, the reality felt impossible to ignore. I sat down slowly. Adrien took the chair across from me. For the first time since entering the room, I realized the office door was closed. Not just closed, locked. The small click had happened earlier without me noticing. My eyes drifted toward it. Adrien followed my gaze. Nobody is coming in. You locked the door. Yes. Why? His answer came immediately. Because for the next hour, nothing is more important than this conversation. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I looked away before he could notice. Unfortunately, Adrien noticed everything. Tell me what happened. I stared at my hands. The answer felt impossible. Where do you begin when the problem is not one bad day, but years of them? Where do you begin when exhaustion has become part of your identity? I am tired, I whispered. Adrien nodded. I know. No. I swallowed hard. Not work tired. The room grew quiet. I am tired of disappointing people. The confession escaped before I could stop it. Once it started, the words kept coming. I am tired of trying harder and harder and still feeling behind. Tired of being compared to everyone else. Tired of hearing that if I just worked more, gave more, sacrificed more, maybe then I would finally be enough. My voice cracked, and I am tired of believing it. Adrien listened without interrupting. No advice, no lectures, no solutions, just attention. Somehow that made it harder to hold back tears. When I finally finished speaking, silence settled over the room again. Adrien leaned back slightly and studied me for several seconds. Then he said something that changed the direction of my entire life. Madison, I think you have been listening to the wrong people for a very long time. I stared at Adrien as though he had spoken another language. For years, people had offered advice. Work harder. Be patient. Stay positive. Nobody had ever suggested that the problem might be the voices I trusted. That is easy for you to say, I whispered. Adrien leaned back in his chair. Why? I laughed quietly. Because you are Adrien Moretti. He raised an eyebrow. And what exactly does that mean? I gestured around the office. The skyline. The company. The success. It means nobody questions your value. The moment the words left my mouth, something changed in his expression. Not anger. Not amusement. Recognition. As though he had heard those assumptions his entire life. You believe that? He asked. Do not you? For a second, silence settled between us. Then Adrien stood and walked toward the massive bookshelf behind his desk. He opened a drawer and removed a worn leather folder. The edges were faded with age. He placed it on the table between us. Open it. Confused, I did. Inside were newspaper clippings, old photographs, documents. The first photograph showed a much younger Adrien standing beside a small grocery store. The building looked modest, ordinary, nothing like the empire he controlled now. That was my father's store, he said quietly. I looked up. You work there? Every day after school. He pointed to another article. We almost lost it twice. My eyes moved across the page. Financial hardship. Debt. Long hours. The story felt strangely familiar. Not because our lives were the same. I turned another page. More articles. More years. More obstacles. Why are you showing me this? Adrien met my gaze. Because success has a habit of erasing history. The room became quiet again. He sat across from me. Do you know what I see when I look at you? I immediately looked away. Probably someone falling apart. No. The answer came instantly. I see the woman who reorganized an entire department in 6 months. I frowned. Adrien continued. The woman who trained 12 new employees without being asked. My throat tightened. That is just my job. No. His voice remained calm. That is who you are. I tried to argue. He did not let me. The woman who remembers everyone's birthday. The woman who stays late when someone needs help. The woman people trust when everything goes wrong. Every sentence chipped away at something I had believed for years. You make it sound important. Adrien looked genuinely surprised. It is important. I stared down at the table. The problem was not that I had never accomplished anything. The problem was that I had spent years treating every accomplishment as normal and every mistake as proof of failure. Suddenly, I saw the pattern. The impossible standards. The endless comparisons. The exhaustion. Adrien watched realization cross my face. There it is. What? I asked softly. The moment you start questioning the story you have been telling yourself. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Not from sadness. From something else. Relief, maybe. Hope. The feeling was unfamiliar. Adrien folded his hands and leaned forward slightly. Madison. I looked up. His expression softened in a way I had never seen before. I do not think you are here because you want to quit. The room felt very still. Then why am I here? Adrien held my gaze for several seconds before answering. Because you are exhausted from carrying expectations that were never yours to begin with. For the first time that day, I stopped trying to defend the pain. Adrien's words lingered in the room long after he finished speaking. Expectations that were never yours to begin with. I stared out the window at the city below. Tiny yellow taxis moved through the streets. People crossed intersections carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Everyone seemed to know where they were going. Meanwhile, I felt as though I had spent years running toward a finish line that kept moving farther away. How do you do that? I asked quietly. Adrien tilted his head slightly. Do what? See things nobody else notices. A faint smile appeared. I pay attention. I laughed softly. That sounds too simple. Most important things are. The answer should have annoyed me. Instead, it made me smile for the first time all afternoon. Adrien noticed immediately. Of course he did. There it is. I rolled my eyes. Do not start. I am serious. He leaned back in his chair. That smile has been missing for months. My eyebrows lifted. Months. 8, if I had to guess. I stared at him. You counted. No. He paused. I noticed. Something about that answer hit unexpectedly hard. Not because it was romantic. Because it was rare. Most people noticed results. Adrien noticed people. The realization made me look at him differently. For years, I had worked on the executive floor. I had organized schedules, coordinated meetings, solved problems before they became crises. Yet somehow I had never understood the man behind the office door. The powerful businessman everyone talked about. The intimidating leader who seemed impossible to surprise. Sitting across from him now, he looked less intimidating than he ever had. More human. More real. Adrien stood and walked toward a cabinet near the wall. A moment later, he returned carrying a tablet. I want to show you something. I frowned. What is it? He handed me the device. The screen displayed employee feedback surveys from the previous year. At first, I did not understand why he was showing them to me. Then I saw my name. Again, and again, and again. I scrolled slowly. Madison helped me during my first week. Madison stayed late when my father was sick. Madison made me feel welcome. Madison solved a problem nobody else could fix. Madison is the reason I stayed. My chest tightened. There were dozens of comments. Maybe hundreds. I looked up in disbelief. What is this? Adrien folded his arms. The truth. I shook my head. These are just comments. No. His voice remained calm. These are people describing your impact. I looked back down at the screen. Every message felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone stronger. More capable. More important. Not me. Adrien seemed to read that thought immediately. You spent years measuring your value by what you had not accomplished. The room grew quiet. You never stopped to look at what you already had. My eyes burned again. This time the tears felt different. Less like defeat. More like release. Adrien sat across from me once more. Madison. I met his gaze. You are not failing. His voice was steady. Certain. Unshakable. You are simply exhausted from carrying a version of yourself that never existed. And for the first time in years, I began to wonder if he might be right. I left Adrien's office nearly 3 hours after I had entered it. The resignation letter remained on his desk. Unsigned. Forgotten. Or maybe not forgotten at all. Maybe it had simply become irrelevant. The executive floor looked different as I walked back toward my office. Not because anything had changed. Because I had. The strange part was that I could not explain exactly how. The problems were still there. My family had not suddenly become supportive. The pressure had not disappeared. My inbox was still full. Yet something felt lighter. As though someone had finally loosened a knot I had been carrying for years. The next morning, I arrived at work expecting the feeling to vanish. Instead, it followed me through the entire day. Around noon, a situation erupted between two departments over a major client presentation. Deadlines were colliding. Tempers were rising. Everyone seemed convinced the project was about to fail. Normally, moments like this made me anxious. Today, I simply focused on solving the problem. 2 hours later, the presentation was back on track. The client was satisfied. The crisis disappeared. Most people moved on immediately. I did too. At least until Adrien appeared outside my office door. Walk with me. I blinked. Now. We moved through the building together. Employees greeted him as we passed. Some looked nervous. Others looked impressed. Adrien acknowledged everyone with the same calm professionalism. Eventually, we reached a conference room overlooking the city. The room was empty except for a few senior executives finishing a discussion. The moment we entered, the conversation stopped. Adrien stepped inside. Tell her. Confusion crossed my face. Tell me what? One of the executives smiled. The client specifically asked us to thank you. I frowned. For what? Another executive laughed softly. For saving the presentation. Heat rushed to my face. It was a team effort. Adrien glanced at me. Of course it was. Then he looked at the room. And who organized the team? Silence followed. I immediately wanted to disappear. Compliments always made me uncomfortable. Recognition felt worse. The executives exchanged knowing smiles. One of them spoke. Madison, you have a habit of fixing problems before most of us realize they exist. Another nodded. The company would look very different without you. I stared at them. Part of me wanted to argue. Another part suddenly remembered the employee surveys Adrien had shown me. The comments. The gratitude. The evidence I had spent years ignoring. Maybe this was not an isolated moment. Maybe it was a pattern. Adrien watched the realization unfold across my face. Later that evening, after most employees had gone home, I found myself standing beside the windows in his office again. The city glowed beneath the darkening sky. Adrien poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to me. You planned that, I said. A faint smile appeared. Plan what? The conference room. No. He took a sip of coffee. I simply gave other people a chance to say what they already believed. I looked out across Manhattan. Thousands of lights stretched toward the horizon. For the first time in a very long time, I wondered what my life might look like if I stopped measuring myself through criticism. Adrien stepped beside me. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Then he said something so quietly I almost missed it. Madison, you have spent years proving your worth. I turned toward him. His expression was calm, certain, unshakable. The only person left to convince is you. The following Friday, I arrived at work expecting another normal day. Instead, Adrien appeared outside my office at exactly 9 o'clock, carrying a set of car keys. Come with me. I looked up from my computer. I have 3 meetings before lunch. Not anymore. I blinked. What? He placed a printed schedule on my desk. Every meeting had been reassigned or postponed. Adrien. He folded his arms. You are taking the day off. I stared at him as though he had lost his mind. I do not take days off. That is the problem. Before I could argue, he added, that was not a suggestion. 30 minutes later, I found myself sitting in the passenger seat of a black luxury sedan, leaving Manhattan behind. The city skyline slowly disappeared in the rearview mirror. Where are we going? I asked. Adrien kept his eyes on the road. Somewhere without conference calls. Very specific. A faint smile appeared. I thought you would appreciate that. The drive lasted nearly 2 hours. Eventually, the highways gave way to quiet country roads lined with trees touched by early autumn colors. Gold, orange, deep red. The farther we traveled, the lighter I felt. My phone stopped buzzing. My email stopped matching. Deadlines seemed less urgent with every passing mile. When we finally arrived, I stared in surprise. A small lakeside town stretched along the water. Families walked along the main street. Local shops displayed handmade signs. Sailboats drifted across the lake beneath a bright blue sky. It looked like a place forgotten by stress. You brought me here? I asked. Adrien parked the car. You need proof that life exists outside your office. I laughed despite myself. That is your plan. It is a good plan. We spent the afternoon walking through the town. No meetings. No schedules. No expectations. We stopped at a bookstore. Then a bakery. Then a small lakeside cafe where neither of us discussed work for nearly an hour. At first, the silence felt strange. Then it felt peaceful. As the afternoon sunlight reflected across the water, I realized something unsettling. I could not remember the last time I had enjoyed a day without feeling guilty about it. Adrien seemed to notice immediately. You are thinking too much again. I looked at him. How do you always know? Because you get the same expression every time. He pointed toward the lake. Tell me what you see. I followed his gaze. Water. Keep going. I smiled. Boats. Trees. Families. Adrien nodded. Good. What was the point of that? For 5 seconds, you were not evaluating yourself. The answer stopped me cold. He was right. For one brief moment, I had simply existed. No measuring. No comparing. No proving. Just living. We stood beside the water as the sun began sinking toward the horizon. The sky turned shades of gold and amber. Everything felt quiet. Simple. Real. I glanced toward Adrien. The powerful businessman everyone feared looked surprisingly relaxed beneath the fading sunlight. Less like a legend, more like a man. And for the first time, I found myself wondering who Adrien Moretti was when nobody needed anything from him. As though sensing the question, he looked toward the lake and spoke softly. There was a time when I forgot how to stop running too. I turned toward him. Something in his voice told me there was a story behind those words. A story he had never shared before. The lake reflected the last light of the evening as Adrien and I stood quietly beside the water. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The breeze moved gently across the shoreline, carrying the scent of pine trees and distant fireplaces. Then Adrien looked out across the lake and continued. When I was 23, I had an older brother. The word surprised me. In all the years I had worked for him, I had never heard him mention family beyond his father. His name was Luca. Adrien's voice remained calm, but something deeper moved beneath the surface. He was the person everyone depended on. Smart, reliable, the kind of man who believed he could carry every problem by himself. I felt my chest tighten. The description sounded familiar. Too familiar. Adrien noticed immediately. Exactly. I looked down at the water. What happened? For a few seconds, he said nothing. He spent years trying to meet expectations that kept growing. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Family expectations, business expectations, his own expectations. The silence that followed felt heavy. One day he admitted he was exhausted. Adrien smiled sadly. Do you know what everyone told him? I shook my head. Work harder. The answer landed like a stone in my chest. Because I had heard those same words. So many times. Nobody asked how he was doing, Adrien continued. Nobody asked what it was costing him. The lake shimmered beneath the fading sunlight, including me. I looked at him. For the first time since meeting Adrien Moretti, I saw regret in his eyes. Not weakness. Regret. Real and human. You could not have known. He gave a small nod. Maybe. Then he looked toward me. But I learned something afterward. I waited. People rarely break because they are weak. His voice remained steady. They break because they spend too long carrying things they were never meant to carry alone. The words settled between us. I thought about the past few years. The impossible standards. The constant pressure. The way I had convinced myself that asking for help meant failure. Suddenly, the pattern seemed obvious. Adrien had not stopped me from quitting because he needed an employee. He had stopped me because he recognized something he had seen before. Something he never wanted to ignore again. We started walking slowly along the shoreline. The town lights glowed in the distance. Reflections danced across the water. That is why you would not sign the resignation letter. Adrien glanced at me. Partly. What is the other reason? A faint smile appeared. Because it was a bad decision. I laughed. A real laugh this time. Warm and effortless. Adrien smiled too. The expression softened the sharp edges people always associated with him. For a moment, he looked less like the powerful man who controlled boardrooms and more like someone who understood exactly how difficult life could become. We reached the end of the dock and stopped. The sky above us had turned deep blue. Stars slowly emerged overhead. Madison. I looked up. Yes. His expression grew serious again. You do not owe anyone perfection. The words hit harder than any speech could have. Because deep down, I had spent years trying to earn something that should never have required earning. The right to be enough. Standing there beside the lake, I felt something shift inside me. Not a dramatic transformation. Something quieter. Stronger. The beginning of believing him. Monday morning felt different. Not because the office had changed. The same elevators moved between floors. The same conversations echoed through hallways. The same skyline stretched beyond the windows. The difference was me. For the first time in years, I walked into Moretti Capital without carrying the weight of proving myself before the day had even begun. The feeling was unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, yet it stayed with me throughout the morning. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. My mother. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Normally, our conversations followed the same pattern. Questions about work. Comparisons to other people. Subtle reminders of expectations I never seemed to meet. This time, something unexpected happened. When the conversation turned toward criticism, I did not defend myself. I did not explain. I did not apologize. I simply listened and then calmly changed the subject. Afterward, I sat in silence for nearly a minute. My heart was racing, not because of the conversation, because for the first time, I had not allowed someone else's disappointment to become my responsibility. It felt like a small victory. Later that afternoon, Adrien called me into his office. I expected another discussion, another lesson. Instead, he handed me a folder. "What is this?" I asked. "An opportunity." I opened it. Inside was a proposal for a new company initiative focused on employee development and workplace wellness. My eyes widened as I read. Training programs, mentorship systems, mental health resources, support structures for employees struggling with burnout. The more I read, the more familiar it felt. "This is..." Adrien leaned back in his chair. "Your project." I looked up immediately. "My what?" A faint smile appeared. "Your project." I stared at him. "I never suggested any of this." "No." He nodded toward the folder. "But you lived it." The room grew quiet. Adrien folded his hands. "You understand this problem better than anyone else here." For several seconds, I could not speak. The old version of me immediately wanted to refuse. Too difficult. Too important. Someone else would be better. But those thoughts sounded weaker than they used to. "You think I can do this?" Adrien looked genuinely confused by the question. "Madison." His voice was steady. "I know you can." The certainty in his answer hit harder than I expected. Not because he believed in me, because he expected me to believe it too. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing ideas and making notes. For the first time in a long time, work felt meaningful again. Not because I was trying to earn approval, because I was building something that could help people. As evening settled over Manhattan, I stood beside the windows in Adrien's office once more. Golden sunlight reflected across the glass towers outside. The city seemed brighter somehow. Hopeful. "You know," I said quietly, "a few weeks ago I was convinced quitting was the only answer." Adrien glanced up from his desk. "And now?" I smiled. The answer came easily. "Now I think I was trying to escape the wrong thing." Adrien studied me for a moment. Then he smiled. Not the reserved smile he showed during meetings. A real one. Proud. Genuine. And in that moment, I realized something important. My life was no longer being shaped by fear. It was finally being shaped by choice. 3 months later, I stood outside Adrien's office holding a single envelope. The irony was impossible to ignore. The last time I had stood here with an envelope in my hand, I had been ready to walk away from everything. Today felt completely different. The executive floor buzzed with energy. The Employee Wellness Initiative had become one of the company's most successful programs. Participation exceeded every projection. Employee retention improved. Workplace satisfaction increased. More importantly, people were finally talking about things they had spent years hiding. Burnout, pressure, expectations. For the first time, those conversations were not treated as weaknesses. They were treated as reality. I took a slow breath and knocked on Adrien's door. "Come in." The familiar voice made me smile. Some things never changed. I stepped inside. Adrien sat behind his desk reviewing reports. The afternoon sun poured through the windows behind him, painting the skyline in shades of gold. He looked up. "Madison." His eyes immediately moved to the envelope in my hand. A strange expression crossed his face. Surprise. Then concern. "What is that?" I walked toward the desk. "An envelope." "I can see that." He leaned back slightly. "Should I be worried?" The question made me laugh. "Maybe." Adrien's gaze narrowed. "That is not reassuring." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I placed the envelope on his desk exactly the way I had months earlier. The memory flashed between us immediately. Adrien looked at the envelope, then at me. "You are enjoying this." "A little." He sighed dramatically. "I knew giving you confidence would eventually become a problem." I smiled and nodded toward the envelope. "Go ahead." Adrien picked it up slowly. The room felt strangely quiet. Outside the windows, Manhattan stretched toward the horizon. Inside, my heart beat faster than it should have. Finally, he opened it. His eyes moved across the page. Then he stopped. Looked down again. "Read it a second time." "Madison." I could not stop smiling. "Keep reading." He did. When he finished, something softened in his expression. Not relief exactly. Something deeper. The document was not a resignation letter. It was a proposal. A long-term expansion plan for the Employee Wellness Division. A future. A commitment. A decision. Adrien looked up. "You are staying." The words hung between us. Months earlier, I would have heard them as an instruction. Today they sounded completely different. I nodded. I am staying. Not because I was afraid to leave. Not because I had nowhere else to go. Because for the first time in my life, I had stopped running from myself. Adrien stood and walked around the desk. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. We did not need to. Some moments were too important for unnecessary words. I looked out at the city beyond the glass. The same city, the same building, the same office where I once believed quitting was my only option. Everything appeared unchanged. Yet everything had changed. Adrien followed my gaze. Do you regret bringing that first envelope? He asked. I thought about the tears, the exhaustion, the hopelessness. Then I shook my head. No. His eyebrow lifted. Why not? I smiled softly. Because if I had never walked into this office that day, I never would have learned something important. What is that? I looked toward him. The answer came easily now. Naturally. Honestly. Being enough was never something I had to earn. The afternoon sunlight filled the room as silence settled comfortably between us. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt exactly where I wanted to be.